There you are, isn't it?
Hey, shall I do the introduction?
Oh, please, especially with your lion's ears, you look gorgeous.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. We have the wonderful Anthony Blake here, and we were going to discuss Hyparxis, which you learned from J.G. Bennett, I believe. Is
That's right.
maybe you could explain what it is first, and then what brought you to J.G. Bennett discussing it?
Well, that would when we're talking about what brought me to John Bennett, which I was taken to be a very fortuitous thing. The main fact to know is that Mr. Bennett was, as a very young man, very interested in and knowledgeable about mathematical physics. And he was, of course, as a very, very young man there at the time of the creation of the theories of relativity and general relativity, special relativity and general relativity. And he became attracted to ideas of other dimensions. And this was something which he followed up throughout his life. And so his original start was in, you know, the forefront of mathematical physics about those early years, 1910 up to 1920, when he got involved in the war and became wounded. And this was actually important for his understanding of dimensions because he had experience while recovering from being shot during the war, of which put him out of his body, and this led to him appreciating that this there was something which was real and accessible to experience, and not just a mathematical device. But we can't really go into it now. But I have to say that this thing about many dimensions, which is now current in things like string theory and so on, are all taken to be mathematical devices. The idea that one can directly experience these other dimensions was never countenanced. It was just a device which can enable you to do some calculations. But for Mr. Bennett, they were more than a device. They said this is a co-dimension of experience. And he actually devoted his life in some respects to get people to become sensitive or to see these other dimensions um, in their experience, and to say that it's actually a concrete reality for people and not just an abstraction which we can artificially get excited about. So that's a long rigmarole to all of that, but just to give you an impression, we might get into it some more. And it is the word hyparxis you can really find in Greek philosophy. Time of Plato and Aristotle have both used the term, and it's interesting just to add in here another distraction in a way, but when Mel wrote his great book about all the scientific ideas of the higher worlds and so on, and he introduced hypothesis, his footnote about its references to Aristotle. He gives the footnote in Greek, ancient Greek, because he was an educated, he's still in that early education, when people had something like a real education. And so an educated man would know Greek, could read Greek. But nowadays people would just laugh at you, what, read Greek, they can hardly read Shakespeare these days. But there's another thing about it. But it was very obscure, this, and I spent a long, 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 long time trying to track down what it actually meant in this reference and found other references. And it does just recognizable. I just the other day, what I did was to take chat PBT, if I got the acronym correct, the artificial intelligence, and ask him about this. He came up with instantly with the wonderful definition of the term hypoxis, which so I'm now intending to use the ChatGPT as a search engine, which is much 10,000 times better than Google, which is an atrocity. Google is such a waste of time. Yeah. So there it was. And what it was, it's got various kinds of meaning. And it comes a word which means something like existence or even subsistence. And it's a peculiar thing. It's not simply existing. There's a sense in it always of uh, how can I call it, a force in it, which led Mr. Bennett to translate it or give his translation as ableness to be.
Hmm.
Uh, and we might talk about this ableness in practical terms, how it affects inner work and so on. There's, again, I want to emphasize that with Mr. Bennett, you have not only the abstract themes, which he could handle and put into his books and so on, but also there was some immediate experiential component associated with them, which probably most readers of the dramatic universe are not aware of. So, uh, how can we take it from here?
Because he discusses it in is it the dramatic universe? I thought it was a different book he discussed
Well, he was
briefly.
discussing it all the time in various books in various ways, you see, but uh, how to go? Let me make a few comments on the dramatic universe because he
Hmm.
had the idea of it, starting it in 1920s, when to his first explained the idea to his first wife, and he had various vicissitudes of life, the wars and so on, and it really started becoming serious for him, strangely enough, in the Second World War, when he was came in charge of an institute for research into coal utilization, because he was you can call him an industrial scientist, so to speak. That's when he came in contact with a lot of quite clever people in England who helped him with his work later on. And it was always for him this mixture being this, because he had this admiration for modern science. He thought they really were giving insights into reality, which could be taken further. But he also had complete devotion to Gurdjieff and his ideas. And he wanted to bring them together because it said, like a lot of people say, there's only one reality. You can't be just different versions, but even that's in question these days, I suppose. So he would uh, he spent and it was extraordinary because he was dealing with living in the middle of the war and doing this research and having to deal with the politics and all the rest of it, and also writing this thing. But he really had one of his diaries. I got notes about it. He was saying like he talked being in the Institute of Chemists in London, seeing these portraits of these famous people and thinking, I'm going to achieve as much as them, but even more because I'm going to bring Gurdjieff into it.
Is that
So,
ego talking?
yeah, yeah. Well, I must add this sort of anecdote about this. He said, he said, I need to command all the best of Western philosophy, he said, to do this job. So then he says the next day he sat down with Hegel, a bit of Hegel's phenomenology, I think, of Hegel. And then admits the next day, I'm finding this rather difficult. He said, for a line that sort of endeared me to him because everybody finds Hegel difficult. But anyway, he went off and did that. But the explanation of it is interesting because how to say it? There is a serious kind of work to it is which I always resonate with the phrase Ezra Pound translated it from Confucius to render into words the inarticulate, the still tones of the heart. This rendering into words as is an extraordinary action, I believe. Uh, there are people who I think are just reactive and lazy who'd like to dismiss thinking altogether and language altogether and say, "Oh, I can't put what's important to me into words." Okay, because it means they've got this inner experience which is very high and the words are very low.
Mhm.
You see, it's actually a pure egoism on their part, but it's this sense. And because a lot of people say, if you can put it into words, does it mean it's crude or simple or unimportant or primitive or something like that? It's just coarse. The final things only comes when we can't speak about them and so on. And there's, well, some kind of authorization or approval of this, like in Wittgenstein's first statement on his first philosophical work, which he later retracted, of course, Logico-Philosophical Tractatus. So, of that whereof we cannot speak, one must be silent thereof. And which he then went on to actually violate himself very much later on. Well, the point being this, the thing about putting it into language is crucial. And something is done by this. Something is created by this. And there's lots of some things in here which we might touch upon because this I find that people who reject this putting things into words, are really lacking in this respect for language because this language we have is the accumulative result of hundreds of thousands of years of human experience and interactions. And it's only through this language that we're able to, for good or ill, accomplish all the feats, all the changes which we have seen. The social structure and the way we eat, live, you might say, has led to disastrous results, but also to wonderful things. But, so I, I should pause here and go back to this thing that to is putting it into words, and also as a kind of putting into words which has to change with the times, with the generations. What you could do one time you couldn't do before, and it's not forever. And
Words
so,
also change, don't they?
pardon?
Words change as well.
Yes, and
Like
if
I
it
can't remember
says
which came first, terror or terrific, but they both mean they come from the same etymology, but they both mean different things, the opposites of each other.
could you tell me what those two things are again?
Terror, for example, terror and terrific.
I don't know
Things used
that.
to be terrific, but they can also be terrible.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay, okay, yeah. Like all real things, perhaps. You can't imagine something significant without it being dangerous or possibly harmful to people, because it's always putting people in front of a choice. But so he was, Mr. Bennett went a different way, and it's very interesting to his mentor, to his teacher, Gurdjieff, because Gurdjieff, as you know, and you've been deeply involved in this, his famous book, with actually three books under the title All and Everything, three series of writings. And the first series of writings was this Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. And I'm mentioning it because it's significant in the context of how things are expressed and rendered into words, because it was interesting towards the end of his life when uh, Gurdjieff was in Paris with various people, and he'd heard for the first time a reading from the book written by Spensky a long decades before, the about 1920 or thereabouts, early 20s, called now In Search of the Miraculous, which incidentally the original title uh, was the
Fragments of an unknown teaching, but he couldn't use
frag
that title because um, one of the leading theosophists had just brought a book out with a title very similar.
ah, I love that original title, that really,
Hmm.
because Uspensky himself, and I'm just a distraction in the game, got so obsessed with there being some kind of complete system which was coherent, who would contain everything, and searching for it, which is for me, brought up in modern 20th century, so was a great mistake because this whole notion of having a kind of getting hold of a complete system is a mirage. And this was shown by the incompleteness theory and whose name I've now forgotten. Of course, you know who it is the chap who was worked in the Institute of Advanced Studies in America for a long time. And it's so awful getting old about this. Anyway, he was about 1926, I think it was. He brought this out. This was shocks the mathematical. He said there can't be any complete mathematics because there's always some element in it which can't be proved by anything in the system at all. It's that to require something to be brought in. You can't, should it? Yet it's known to be true, but we can't prove it. And this completely changed the nature of feeling of mathematics. And so I always thought that this Spencer always wanting this complete system and everything in its place is that kind of mind which couldn't appreciate what was really going on. In fact, the sort of fragmentariness and incompleteness of the Gurdjieff teaching was an essential part of his power, of its reality. If you got it all nicely turned out, you could turn it into an academic subject.
No.
No, she says.
No.
Right.
But even as
No,
Spencer said at the end, there was no system. But I think he's trying to say, I think he's saying there is no complete system. We all have to develop our own system from the basics of the Gurdjieff work. But that's just my own thoughts on
well, I
it.
feel very much in sympathy with that, and Spencer said things very much in line with it, which is a great change of it, you know. You throw it all over and start again. But this is, in the sense that phrase, to start again might be the real symbol of the work, of the Gurdjieff work. To be able to start again, not having to be loaded down. And then don't get me on to a side drift about the nature of many followers of Gurdjieff today. But then,
Right, we'll stay away from that. But Gurdjieff also said that words are misused today. They've lost their original meanings, and that's why he was bringing in words like he put together his own words that had precise meanings.
right, that is so. Then I'll come on to that because when he heard Svensky's book being read, he hadn't known what was going on, really, concretely. And he said, I love Svensky, he write what I say, that he acknowledged that what Dostoevsky wrote was accurate about his teaching. But he said, it's not the way to do it, my way is better. And his way was what Denis Surat called a mythological. He said the Gurdjieff was remarkable. He invented a completely new mythology. And he even claimed it must have had extraterrestrial sources because it was so original. And the whole way of using language was different, all the way with that kind of attempt to show it as a kind of science, uh, with by putting numbers in and systems and all these kinds of things, the kind of reductionist science in a way, turning everything into numbers. But they only had, in Beelzebub's tales, you have characters, uh, and including Mr. God, his endlessness, and angels, and advanced beings, and prophets, and all sorts of characters which permeate his pages are so delightful. And there's a lot we could get into about the way he did it and the way that he combined two kinds of actor in his book. One was the laws. The laws themselves become almost like gods, superhuman forces which govern everything in the universe. But there are also individuals, like his famous unknown prophet of the future, Ashiata Shimash. Um, and these characters are incredibly vivid and alive, uh, and in which he embraced the corpus of acknowledged what we call messengers, from above, like Christ and Muhammad and Krishna and so on. Anyway, the point was that this whole way of describing it, so coming back to Hyparxis, it's most of the words Mr. Bennett uses in his book, are common words, which, accepted scientific words. Hyparxis was an unusual one, but he didn't invent it. But the only, I think, the actual word he invented was apocritical integral, which refers to the uh, extent in the dimension of being of something. And this, because in one of his primordial ideas was that there were these various three aspects of reality, and the middle one was the dimension of being. But being comes in strata, like that. And it's got this, which can be seen today as almost like a projection of energy levels inside an atom because they're discrete and they're not continuous at all. They have to be discrete, and they have a structure to them. And so these uh, things in levels signify this uh, thing which you can't uh, get. Still, you get things around it. So it's a very special thing in the work and so on, which is shared with other systems. That is about there's this kind of cosmic organization of things in different levels, which can be generalized to everywhere in the universe. Um, so there are barriers between the levels, and so it gives them a kind of uh, stability, a kind of coherence. Uh, all that which is very attractive to our understanding. It's even like, the old projection of light, the spectrum, the rainbow, and so on, all these discrete levels and so on. They're actually not discrete, in fact, but we think about them in that way. So this thing about different levels um, and this way he would talk in quite a simplistic but effective way about, one brain beings and two brains and three brains and so on. One brain being the invertebrates, like a worm, and two brain beings like a mammal, like a dog, and the three brained only being humans in one example. Then he extended it, and all of that was to get this sense of a hierarchy going on. Uh, and there's a, a kind of mystical and mythical edge to it, which you find in some way slightly reflected in ordinary science, but only to a little degree, because they're still looking for this, this whole puzzle about where does the structure of the universe come from? How was that made? But we're getting into very deep waters here for a moment. I just want to go back to so the apocritical interval was the notion of putting you like to give it a label and a name and so on. And again, you can market it and say, well, giving names to people is just fantasy most of the time. Like a word, you think of a word like democracy. Gosh, you know, um, there's no, I know it's strange to me. People don't even begin to hesitate when they use this word because everybody knows it's just a mess. What the hell does it mean? And what it means to different people with different purposes and minds and all the rest of it. But so many things are about this. And so there's another way of understanding, which even goes back to the Greeks and this genius of Plato and Socrates. And he said this, because the ordinary way you get, it was still in the 20th century, remember this thing about the radio broadcaster during the war called Broad, his philosopher. And his whole uh, sort of standard thing was define your terms, you see. And then you get into some arguments, say, define your terms, you see. But in a way, in the Socratean attitude, this is a no-go. You define your terms, you cut off the whole thing, the whole process, the whole action, your whole understanding right off. You don't start by defining things. You might have something emerge, and they follow the dialogues. Often they were pursuing the thing, what is the good? And they go through all these sort of rigmaroles and conversations and so on, which is very artistically staged by Plato, until you get to the region where you can see you get almost like a vision of the good, but you never define it.
When you define something, you put it in a box.
Exactly. And the box can be put on a shelf with all the other things. He's rather like that scene, remember, at the end of, that uh, Dr. Jones, uh, Indiana Jones film, the first one. They put all what is it, the Ark of the Covenant or
Oh,
something, they put it
yeah,
in a
in the
box
archives.
and put it in the garbage. That's such a representation of what it's like for most people. It's all in these locked up boxes. So you can see, imagine by a lot of kind of renegades who want to break in and smash open these boxes and find what the hell's inside them, in which some of the esoteric people do and everything. Anyway, so there's that. So whereas Goethe was inventing all these words, even like Triamaster Kam, though, and some people can follow up and do it, because a lot of these words are Greek and some of them are Armenian, some of them are Russian. And I think there's some other examples, don't know what it was, like even the word he gives for time, Hieropas, the merciless hero pass. Does it really mean the passing of the hero or something like that? There's this hint of it, but in another word, like along with Hyparxis, you know, kids think, what the hell, Hyparxis? You know, hepta means seven, it's a law of seven, you see, but what's all the Shinnok and so on? Um, but I love the translation of that title, what he called the Law of Three, Tiramata Kamino, which is, I've forgotten what it was in the original version of the book, uh, published or was shared around in 1931. And it was like trios, obviously three. Well, Kamino has to do with making or creating. I think it's the Greek root. I'm not sure, but it comes out hopefully translated. I put three together and do, and I love that. This is because it made it. You know what it means? It's work. Is I put the. You know, I'm engaged in doing this. It's not just something floating about in the sky as an ideal kind of thing. So he did that in all the words, but Bennett never did. And he used ordinary words, even words used like eternity, we made much use of. Well, that's been in our languages for a long, long time. We didn't have to invent a term, but hypoxis, even then, when first appears, everybody puzzled about it. And it took me ages. And, you know, you must regard me as a complete idiot, you know, not be it. I tried to follow it, I tried to talk to Greek scholars but to get it down. Eventually, nowadays, it's very easy to access this etymology of it, where it comes from. It is an acknowledged Greek word. It's used by Plato, certainly by Aristotle, and it became very strong in what's called Neoplatonism and so on. But he took it and then changed it because I said it's not about something existing, or sometimes it's almost meant to imply its essential meaning, its numeral meaning, meaning it's not just how it appears, but how it is in itself. Um, to this ableness to be. And it gives you a picture of holding out actually against time because he developed his ideas, you know, became a heading of the war with time. But we can be said to be at war with time because what does time do? It's the merciless Eurobus. It's eroding our reality in any moment. It's just the flow of time. The philosopher John Locke called a perpetual perishing. No. And this is an early insight into what in science is called entropy. And it's a threatening thing because it's the whole sum. You can see people on YouTube talking about this now. The possible theoretical ends of all science and knowledge and technology and so on is a universe which is totally dead. Uh, and that's what's called in 19th century the heat death of the universe. So is there some counter to that? Because why? But Gurdjieff had this extraordinary idea that moons would be evolving into planets and planets evolving into stars and so on, which when I read it as a student of physics, I thought this was crazy. So I couldn't deal with it. I put it away for some time and went back to it, and it's still there. To me, it's crazy.
I had the opposite. For me, it was, wow, that's what we're all here for. And that's why the whole universe is evolving all the time.
That's great. Yes, you can have these different things.
Mm.
Well, so there was this also related to an idea from 1,000 years after the Greeks, most of the early scholastics, including a particular wonderful man called Duns Scotus, who he called it, I probably don't pronounce it correctly, even I can see it's spelled Haeccity or something like that. And it's pronounced roughly Hesity, Hesity. Um, and it's can be roughly translated as thisness. And I thought it was absolutely brilliant. The old thing to invent it from Aristotle, where there's a form, which is like the shape or the nature of the qualities of and matter. Um, he said this only gives you a kind of the species, you know, like you say, man, you know, is a species. But it doesn't tell you it's this man. And for the thisness, you have got to have hesity, which brings out the uniqueness. And the wonderful Jewish scholar Solomon ben Ibn was insisted to there was this third force of the will, which produces this specificity. Now, talking about will is really very highfalutin, of course, but it's so easy to take it just as a human property, like most people do. A consciousness is conscious. You're referring to consciousness as will, referring to just something which is a property of this kind of organism, us. And, and most people would restrict it to us. So that we're the only things with consciousness or anything like will. But Bennett, in his tradition, later to Goethe, will say everything has will. Everything has a kind of consciousness. But he very carefully defined, expressed how to understand how these words are to be taken.
Would they be at different degrees? I always thought that's how I see it. Everything's got a consciousness or a will, but at different degrees to everything else.
That is, that is so. That is so. And it was attempts, I mean, in a way you could see attempts at these laws and higher principles and so on, attempt to talk about that. But it's but I think you got it actually that, if there's this kind of sense of the unity of the whole universe of everything, it can lead you to some sense if you look at the tree and in some sense you know or realize that the tree is aware of you or aware of the whole universe in its own right. Um, it's got to be a two-way process, but for most people in the world still it's a one-way process. And we're the only people who are making decisions and so on. So but that has philosophical problems to some degree because it's the sense of one way could go from us to say, well, we have our purposes in making motor cars and all the rest of it, designing things, making things, and improving this. And so we can make that kind of step where you say, well, we reflect upon ourselves in this and must be something who sort of in a way made us, which is so that thing which made us, which is making things, is a higher degree of intelligence than we are. And that must be in the universe in some way, but we don't recognize it with our sense perception and our ordinary logic, and we cannot detect it in that way. So it has to become some other sense. And so we got all these phenomena of spiritual movements and the rest of it. Um, but, sometimes I think about this, Will, and I used to love old books you can get. You don't get them so much these days. There's a wonderful book I came across years ago with Bennett called The Innate Perversity of Material Objects. I like this idea of attributing perversity, isn't it? They're not just inert. Well, because they're in this worldview where nothing is inert.
Mm-hmm.
That's why this remarkable thing, well, Goethe's remarkable thing, which was hardly developed except through Bennett, this diagram of everything living, because it goes from, I don't know, the realm of minerals up to archangels, and it's all in one scheme. And you think, this is crazy. How can you put them in all together like that? But that's what you mean, and that's related to this extraordinary metaphor I use about food and eating and being eaten, as
Yeah,
you know.
everything eats everything.
Pardon?
Everything eats everything.
That's right. Or it's food for everything. And this interaction being food for and so on. It's like super ecological. And that was one of his main contributions. And he called it the law. There is possibly a law of the reciprocal maintenance of everything existing. Um, it's this. can be taken to be an intimation of the ecological interests of the 20th century, but it goes more than that because there's also, or it's an ecology which is not simply in terms of what we ordinarily would recognize as food, but maybe a kind of ecology of information or will or something of a less tangible nature. And so that there's this approach of the ecology, which uh, which is the logic of the eco or the logic of the home, is uh, not it just belongs to a worldview which really takes seriously that we're everything is connected, but in particular is found that people are connected. And it's a very hard view to maintain in a modern world with so much hatred and division in the world and separateness, where there's still the dominant picture of man is as of an isolated thing locked up in his own skull. So for me, you're not really there at all. You're just an image, and the hallucinations produced by my brain. Blah 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 blah. It all seems very scientific and all the rest of it, but I think it pisses me off. No, it's not, you keep me
And you
going.
mean even if we were together in a room together physically, the same thing?
Yeah,
Not just because
exactly,
we're on Zoom, yeah.
exactly. Well, that's it reminds me of an experience I had when years ago, started meeting people who I've been just dealing with on Zoom for a few years, and I found their physical appearance much more unreal than their appearance on the screen. Because it's what you're used to. I put the three-dimensionality. What is this? What is Are you there, really? Um, but yeah, the so hypoxis comes in here in it's got a couple of senses from the Greeks and so on. I mean, but for me,
Oh, we
it
broke up then. It's got a couple of what? Sorry.
meanings, particular meanings for me. I don't know what I said before,
Okay.
but something like particular
No, no, that's
meaning.
it. We just you just skipped a word. That's great.
Yeah.
No,
But
not
there's
you, but the
uh,
Zoom keeps freezing actually, but hey.
all right. It was about this thing about Bennett's got hold of ableness, because I think it's a modern word, which I don't think they had it for us in the same in Greek. Um, ableness. And but I'll tell you why. It's referring to statements by hmm, authority of my tradition and which to go to. And but it's something in a way very obvious, but not registered by many people in practice. And that he would say, yes, you speaking as he did his time, he wouldn't find people speaking like nowadays. They say, people around you say uh, say you want to be a Christian, so you could have that wish to be a Christian and so on, which means to be devout or religious or whatever committed. They say, but you have to ask yourself, are you able to be a Christian? Now, this would be upsetting to a lot of people and would be still today, because you get a delusion today in everywhere. They say, as people live in terms of what they wish for, not about reality. This thing about it. Because everybody knows what they should do to improve their lives, to be a better person. It's what everybody does. They can't do it. They're not able to. Or they're able to, puts them into the same old thing in a slightly different guise, round and round. Particularly myself, make the same mistakes. I always do
They
mistakes.
use a distorted form of it.
Pardon?
They become a distorted form of it.
Oh, yes. Well, they still, because when things don't happen or develop, the brain is used not for what it usually used to find out truth, but to produce excuses. You can never say this is the difference in the world. Is one used to use his brain is to shut down awareness and explain things away.
Mhm.
And the other hand is that to search for something new and take notice of the information which is coming through. And they're quite almost diametrically opposite. But isn't it true? See, well, it's very difficult for most people say, oh. let us live in hope. I'll get better tomorrow. And they keep on everybody's handing out advice to everybody else in what they should be. And if they don't agree with them, then they're satanic and should be killed. Oh, this is this is
People
what's
can't
good.
think for themselves anymore, or they don't
Ah,
trust themselves anymore.
well, because they're lying to themselves. It's often remarked that for liars and so on, they most deceive is themselves. Because they must be considered like people. Won't give names here because it's, believing in what they do is for the greater good and all that sort of thing. It's all a cover up. All the things like cover up and so on are just in this individual psychology. This is what people are like. You're right to some degree. But Gurdjieff came along and started to trying to prick the bubbles, bring us down to earth.
Make us
And
take responsibility for our actions.
that's right. Even though at first glance we can't. Well, we haven't got the oomph, haven't got the power enough, So then you look for the power and it could lead you down many avenues, even perhaps suspicious one. But how that was Gurdjieff's way seemed to be how to give people the chance to contact ways in which they could get this ableness. And this is, in a way, well, I could call it, referring to myself, can call it also the unknown side of the Gurdjieff work is the real stuff uh, about this thing about capacity. The, and I was thinking before this conversation that one of the key metaphors find to correlate with the work is that which derives from the writings of Jalaluddin Rumi, cooking. He always talks about being cooked.
Mhm.
And the whole practice he's doing, which starts with that training in the kitchen, and doing it, and so he goes around, and the stories of his Masnawi and so on. Um, you know, that famous part where you go to the friend, which is sent to God, knock on the door, and the friend says, "Who is there?" And he says, "I am so and so." It's, if you're there, you you can go away. You're if you are you, just you go away until the man has to go through and get through ordeals and beaten and daffodils suffered, and then he's cooked and returns, knocks on the door, says, "Who is there?" And he said, "Thou." He said, "Come in," you know. You know the story. But aimless is a larger thing. I was trying to relate this to, going back to hypoxis, to an everyday sort of phenomena. That is, uh, that in any line of work, there are things to be found out with work. What works? Now, this what works is a tremendous thing in all of human history, finding out what works. Um, I'll give a sort of illustration of it. The first only one that immediately comes to my mind about this. It always struck in my mind, but reading about 19th century villages and this blacksmith. And one of the things about a job for a blacksmith was tempering of steel. And is, you to get heat up the blade and you plunge it into the liquid, you see. And there was a whole mystique around because the blacksmiths had an apprentice, and the secret was in this way, usually, so hidden from the student because increases the power of the authority, the old regime of human life. Those authority seeks to maintain its authority by hiding things from the lower classes. Can't do. But also the ruins, the fact, the blacksmith had to pee into the liquid to make it effective, or they had to use various ingredients or herbs or whatever it was. But of course, the whole thing has got nothing to do with that. Because what it is that what matters is the temperature at which the steel is plunged into the liquid, which you find out by the color it glows. But you imagine that whole distraction, what's in the liquid, in fact, is how the blade is. So that's typical with a lot of things. To go running around after things which don't matter. And it's in the history of medicine, where things which really do work are not what are believed to work. and so on. So it is not so easy. And I don't have too much empirical, just a few samples and guesses I can build on. Remember this story about when the laser, lasers are, when they invented, and the papers were published about it in journals and so on. The guys who started it off were often getting phone calls from people. I said, I've followed your paper and so on and tried to do what you do, but it doesn't work. I can't make it to work. And then the guy eventually would say, oh, yeah, have you done so and so and so? And to be talking about things which are never in the paper. But they took them for granted, but that's what makes them work. And in every kind of graft you've got, it's that little something which makes it work. Whereas even, I don't know, I was searching for stories, one about the blast furnaces, and these people took it over, and they wanted to find how on earth because slag builds up inside the furnace, how was that removed? And there's something happening. What was they doing? Uh, so eventually they found that there was a guy there who worked, so was the guy was on the ground floor doing the dirty, the ordinary work, who had a rifle and he used to peer through the hole and shoot the slag off the walls. That made it work.
The
And
down and dirty parts of any kind of job they normally keep quiet about.
oh,
But also to keep the secrets, isn't it? And they want to
yeah,
look like you were saying, we're the ones that know how to do it.
that's right. And in part it's hidden from people, and in part it's not hidden from people. They just take it for granted. And so it can slip from generation to generation and no longer got the actual transmission of the know-how, and it gets lost to sight. So people no longer know how to do it. It's like, people today who are even knowing that, you find people who know how to handle digital devices which are no longer in use because the know-how fades from memory around. And it even goes into these ancient monuments you see around. I much admire that book by, I think, a lady called Kelly or something called The Memory Code.
Memory stone. Yeah.
Yes, that's sublime work she did. But said there was a lead who trained in how to put the information into these things and how to read it out. Uh, and these have given great value in society. And then society changed into the fact, what mattered is whether you had guns or not. Could and armies and that sort of thing, and power was worshipped and not knowledge. And so it made things which people knew were to get transmitted, you could have the transmission between them, which is usually a kind of master apprentice uh, sort of thing to be transmitted one person to another. And it was necessary for the whole community, so people lose track of things because they got other things to enjoy them, to entertain them, so to speak. So this is the idea of this ableness in cooking. Very simple things. You get a recipe. There's always, in my limited experience, if you don't know that way of cooking or whatever it is, there's things you never write in the recipe because you assume that people know. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
But they
You see,
don't.
they don't, they say simmer this, you say, well, how long? What kind of simmering is it? Is it really boiling or do you just lightly warm? And do you have, a lid on? And you think it's obvious things, but often these obvious things can be missed. So it can't do. So imagine people doing an inner exercise or something like that. There's the something could be missed. Now, of course, in uh, a process, an action, you have, it's transmission involves, some people being able to recognize that there's something that some people do or able to do or know something which other people don't. And I have a sort of example from that I can refer to. I can't go into details. My friend, Ilan Seacroft, who's a wonderful pianist, and he's working very hard on a project to do with the music of Thomas de Hartmann, who worked with Gertrude. And he's told me about two teachers he's had about pianos music, which showed him things which you don't normally get taught anywhere. One was about rhythm, and one was about sensation. He said he learned from these two women things which he never knew before, like this with information about sensation. He never learnt it in any kind of Gurdjieff Bennett group at all. But this person had this insight into sensation, which enabled him to play better. So it's this real result, to actually master it. He wouldn't. Uh, you,
She'd reached something, that teacher or whoever passed him, she'd reached something further in her stage of
no,
playing that other people hadn't.
no, no. But of course, it's a two-way process. The pupil's got to be receptive. It isn't just lying around. And so it's got to you got to have the luck of somebody around, seeking you out or getting inspired to listen to you in a certain way. Because, well, it's the sort of example I give, a crude picture example. When I was at university and I was in what was called a tutorial with David Bohm. He was, those things were very formal in the way that we had problems to do and we had to work at them. And if we got stuck, we'd ask the tutor. But I started talking to him, you see. And then I couldn't understand it. I was in this incredible, I was just, I always tell people, by the time this conversation was finished, I was in orgasm, literally in orgasm, because it was like
You're taking it
pure
to new
knowledge. Pure.
heights.
But I looked around, these guys were still carrying on doing their bloody problems. I thought, and it's a bit like that. They carried on doing the thing they know how to do instead of listening. There's something here, and people can respond. Thank God, it's the only hope we have. A sort of magnetism, as the metaphor used. So I always remember me a few times at cafes and so on. Somebody's come up to me, even on train once. Somebody came up to me and inquiring, and knowing there's something like asking for something. And I look back on it, and I often didn't respond well to them. I just sort of put them off and that sort of thing. But it's just incredible. People sort of pick up and say, you're doing something. So here, there's something happening here. What is it? What are you up to? What are you saying? And there's always this aspect of this tradition, the fourth way Gurdjieff group, where you don't proselytize,
Mhm.
advertise, and push yourself on people and say, "We got the secrets. Tell us, like, worship us." No, it's the opposite. You say, "Well, go away. You'll get lost."
No, because I know a lot of people, and I have met many people over the years, and I'm sure you've been through the same yourself. They want the knowledge, but they don't want to do the work that comes
Oh,
with it.
that's yeah.
They're not turning it into wisdom. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't do something with it, you're a fool.
It's worse than useless, isn't it? It's like a poison because people have the arrogance and no substance,
Mm.
that kind of thing. Yes, I know. It's well, I know to some degree, but it's so I get the feeling, Debbie, from the general feeling from everything that is, it's an awful, overbearing feeling of pretense all the time. People pretending they could do things, and it's what they're doing is like copying something, going through the motions. At the same time, there are very, creative inventors and all the rest of it. But for the most part, people just, I think, it seems to be like going through the motions. Um, they're made,
But we should take their motions off onto different paths, our own paths, and
ah,
expand them in our own way,
yeah,
rather than copying everybody else or so and so did it like that, so I must do it the same way.
exactly. There was this reminded me of this wonderful French writer, Hubert Benoit, who wrote a lot about Zen. Influenced me a lot at one time, but he wrote this book on enlightenment. He said, well, the first thing he always said was, if there is a true enlightenment, it's like
Oh,
what nobody else has done. And so the contrary thing, enlightenment is, the way people talk about it is usually, oh, yeah, we know what enlightenment is. People all do is they get this enlightenment, and they assume it's the same thing. But he was saying the opposite. If it's true enlightenment, it must be individual, something quite new.
yes, unique for each person.
That's
But we
right.
can all do it.
So you got to find this other thing where what difference makes, and you got reflections of this, because like in the arts, and some people are trying to do something which nobody else has done, and in science too, because out of egoism. But that's part of the game, isn't it? But it's got the right backup idea. It's got to be individual. Which leads us down to I see this thing about Hekasi, whatever that word is, I can't pronounce Hekasity or something like that. It's the thisness, this concrete thisness, and I have to express it by pointing my finger and jabbing it in, using other words like concreteness and so on. But it means like it's 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 got the it's got a kind of guts to it. It's not just a relic. And this affects very much our view of time and history because we still have conception of thoughts, which may be far more stupid than our feelings in this respect. But, we talk about, we picture time spatially as in a line or something like that. And so we always know that at the start we were screwed up because we were picturing it in space. No, the next thing you do is you think, oh, there's the past, but that's happened, that's gone. So that's not there actually. So no past. Then you look to the future. Well, it hasn't come yet. So suddenly decides to no there. So the past is nothing and the future is nothing. You try to look at the present. Oh, there's no room left here at all. So there's nothing. So there's nothing. It's all nonsense. It's just, in a way, the picture Einstein did with his relativity. You can get this a network of space and time and so on. And it means that the whole thing, and I've forgotten the name for it, is in existence, so in a kind of dimension simultaneous. So there's no special now in it at all. There's all time, all space is all
All
in this
happening
one
at
block.
once.
In one, yeah, it's a block, as it's called, the block universe field. And so this now only comes up in, and it's so interesting in science, this conflict between that relativity and quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, because of quantum mechanics, because it's got this focus on actualization with all this hoo-ha about whether it's the observer who collapses the wave function to an actuality. So this thing is not definitely something until it's observed, and all that discussion which goes on, I don't want to get into very much. But you see, it does at least have that character of really having an acceptance of nowness, it's like this, now it's observed, now it happens, this kind of definiteness. And it's going out of this web of the wave function, these probabilities and all these equations and fields and all the rest of it. It's just there's something which goes precipitates sort of like precipitation, like supersaturated liquid, little nothing goes into it, and then something definite happens. And that's very,
What?
very, what? What are you laughing at?
Yeah, something definite happens. But what is usually my
Yeah,
question.
there we get these other issues. I mean, a lot of my friends, in the university too, got really hooked on this marvelous thing, which still most people don't know about, but is known physics, all around this wonderful quantity called action, which I love in this very fundamental, because now you may not realize, but in physics, this term action is much more important than either energy or velocity or anything like or momentum or anything like that. But it's action, and it has the dimensions of energy and time. But it's the idea that, why does, it's the just a crude little indication. The light ray goes into water and it gets bent, like that. You see, why does it go that? And you've got to find a reason why. And so what it is, the picture of it now is that the light takes every possible path from the beginning to every possible one, infinitely. But and these all kind of sum together, and this one, which is the final outcome, is called the line of least action. And that's what actually has got to happen. The action, the movement, the change, which has this least action to it. I explain it very badly, of course, but it's extremely, extremely exciting. Um, and so I think action is very much connected with hypothesis because it's embraced. And you can actually, there's now a wonderful demonstration on YouTube of a man about this, about the reflection of light. It should be on the mirror, so we're equal. incident and reflection is equal angles, and people say, well, we talk about in theory all these other directions the line could take. That's just mathematics. But no, there's a way you can set up a simple thermometer that shows you block off the usual kind of dominant ray, and you can see these other pathways. Some of these other off pathways actually are there. And you don't believe it because this is an interesting thing in physics. I mean,
It's taking the one that has least effort, for another word,
not effort, you see,
the
it's
easiest path.
action. It's got to be action. And
Action, the least.
I'll deviate a bit to this because I always dwell on this. I'm not very intelligent, I must say, because you see, work you see in physics has a dimensions force times distance, and it always gives me an idea of somebody pushing a boulder up a hill, or along the road. So you get this effort in a certain direction. But action, you see, is the dimensions of energy times time, which are very different. And I rather like it because I've often wondered about advocating to Gurdjieff, talk about the Gurdjieff action rather than the Gurdjieff work. Because work is, in a way, a donkey's work.
Mm-hmm.
Plod, 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 plod in the same direction, you see. But action
Yes, action.
has a wholeness. It's like it's got this whole embrace of all the possibilities. You should like, well, let me pretend and say they belong to eternity. All the alternatives, are there. But it comes down to this one definite one, this one calculation which is being done. And that is very extraordinary. But you will remain unconvinced about these other possible pathways and first think about them as just, as I said, speculation or theory, only theory. So why do we have to bother with them? But they're
Mhm.
really there. And so I think they belong to what Bennett tried to deal with in his dimension, fifth dimension of eternity. Because it's about what is possible in alternative ways, uh, out of which only something can happen. So this making something to happen is hyparchic, and that's going from, as the Greeks knew, from possibility to actuality, and that's the way of hyparxis. So that's very tantalizing.
It is indeed.
Yeah. Because you see of us, because there's something, you see, there's two faces to actuality, or I've come across, you see. In a way, actuality is this limitation, this out of all the possibilities, just one thing happens. So actuality is poor, poverty stricken, see. But then in the old theology, it's said about God, God is the one being whose essence, whose possibilities are all actual. So there's everything that he can be, he is in actuality. So it's got the almost opposite meaning. And so what actually happens is something incredibly precious. Really.
Isn't it to encourage us to act
Pardon?
toward, isn't it to encourage us to actualize ourselves to become like God?
Well, that's the way. But it's there's something. You don't think, well, I'm struggling here. Forgive me. People find us why we are sort of limited beings. We're actual. We're going to die, and all that kind of limitation is on us. We grow old, and etc., etc., etc. But is the notion that this world of space and time and decay and blah 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 is obviously a lower world, and this is how it's treated traditionally. The world of the senses, it's all a lower world. Um, there's a kind of a puzzle which was around to say, well, why has God created these lower worlds? It's a daft sort of question in a way, but all these,
Many
this,
responses to it.
uh, well, yeah, it, you think, well, why do we have to go this? We're just in oneself. One is forgetful, asleep, fooling oneself, miserable, closed down. All it is, just plain stupid, daft, and it fluctuates. Sometimes we're a bit more with it and so on. Why do you have these terrible lower states if people are distressed and, you know? You know, you've got all culture, which is like a pretense to cover it up about how stupid we are most of the time and blah, blah, blah. But it's the notion that there's something still incredibly significant in these lower states, and it's something how to do with, and Bennett tried to express this very well, but it's so difficult with will, because to put it absolutely crudely, it says even when we're stupid, miserable little wretches, we still have will. And it's not like, because he always distinguished very carefully between, as far as he could, this being realm, which I say was stratified, so you have levels in it, to the realm of will. He says not like that with levels at all. And it's where you get, excuse me, kind of unity of the universal and the particular, the many and the one. And the kind of algebra or arithmetic in it is totally different from that of being. And I dwell on this a lot myself, or as far as I can. Why? Because everybody's going on about consciousness, You're very dear friends of mine, and this in this spiritual realm, there's just everybody in that realm of vaguely spiritual things, talks about consciousness, the importance of consciousness, and getting more consciousness, and so on. Okay? And it is, uh, for me, a kind of blindness. And I think, because to me, the mid impression of me of consciousness that, is awareness. And it's sort of like of being a spectator, a witness, that sort of character. You see, when you come to will, then immediately I think, well, for me, the association is towards doing, and choosing, and being involved, but it's different. So in a way, I always have to say in a way, which is a get-out clause, to excuse me, but in consciousness, you don't do anything. You can see everything. But in will, you can do something, but may not see everything. Uh, and a few interesting figures got hold of this, and including Goethe, because he always emphasized, using that same word again, action. There are things in action which go beyond thought. And I think this is right. It comes down, well, it comes down to, it has extreme instantiations, like in Shipuri Baba. Put aside the veil of consciousness, and you will see God. Now, most people come across just sort of skip over that bit. They don't stop and say, oh, really? This is a bit weird. Oh, but Bennett took it on powerfully, right? Because consciousness, it misses the point, so to speak. And you see, will is you got this. You must admit this awkward. Most of this is you get the proposition you can't be aware of what your will is doing. If we can talk about your will at all, you can't be aware of it because it's beyond awareness. And you think, well, how can I relate to it?
Coming from the magical path. That is
Well,
all about developing your will, one's will on the magical paths. It's
really?
not about being conscious. No, this is one. I know this. Many people will poo-poo me for this, but the best book on the development of the will is by
Yes.
Alice Crowley.
Oh,
Because
oh dear.
without will, you can't do anything.
But,
I'm actually going to have to go in a minute, Tony, because
oh,
it's
that's the
coming up to the
chamber.
top of the hour, and I know it's just gone really quick. We've done a lot of action in this video.
Also, let me coughing away. Oh dear, I
I
don't know.
think you need a drink. I have to be somewhere else in a little while.
All right, maybe we'll have part two. Who knows?
Definitely, let's do a part two. This was really fascinating to talk about, and I would
Uh,
love to perhaps bring in what I know about the will next time to see whether it relates to what you're, which I think it is, what you're speaking about. I've done many shows about the will on my YouTube channel. If anyone wants to check it out, DJ Elliot
okay.
1428457. And of course, Tony's got the diversity. If people want to find out more about him, check out the diversity website. It's also getting very dark in here, I've noticed.
Yeah, I
So
just noticed I was going to try to comment on that and say you're going to fade into the obscura, into the black hole. Anyway, God bless. See you
thank
soon.
you.